Lisa Butterworth. I am here at the Mormon Sex Info podcast. I have invited Cami Hurst on today. Cami, introduce yourself.
Hi there. My name's Cami Hurst. I'm a marriage and family counselor in Meridian, Idaho. I'm also a sex therapist. I've got a postgraduate degree in sex therapy, and midway through my supervision hours for my certified. My clientele, my specialties are sex therapy, both for couples as well as for LGBT youth and their parents, as well as for mixed orientation marriages. And then I also do quite a bit of faith crisis work or mixed faith marriages. I'd say my clientele is probably a third active or Orthodox Mormon, probably a third progressive or post-Mormon, and then a third never Mormon, where the referral's coming from a urologist or a pelvic floor physical therapist. But that's me.
That sounds very similar to my clientele, actually.
Does it?
Yeah. We have really overlapping kind of specialties, I think.
Yeah.
So the topic that I wanted to talk about today was prompted by one of my clients who she had not had good first sexual experiences with her husband. And so she was saying, well, my sister's about to get married in the temple. I would really like to tell her some things that might help her to have a better experience than I did around my sexual experiences. What kind of advice would you recommend that I give my sister so that she might maybe have a better experience with her, first experiences with sexuality than I did? And I thought that was a great question. And she and I sort of brainstormed a bunch of things for a while. And after we wrote them down, I thought, you know what? That would be a great topic for Mormon Sex Info.
It'd be a great topic for Mormon Sex Info, for sure.
Right?
Oh, and a big one too. When you look at what's your advice it's like, oh dear, how do we package what should have been a lifelong, complete sexuality education into bullet points of advice the week before wedding? That's overwhelming already, right?
So that might be our first bit of advice to Mormon parents in general is maybe let's package this as a lifetime conversation instead of bullet points right before the marriage. But if that's not an option, then we will use this as backup.
I love it. Yeah, the disclaimer of it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to have night before advice sessions. It can be. So that did make me lifelong. Yeah, no, it can be a lifelong education of 500 5-minute conversations that have been had since birth. Right? Yeah.
I did not get that. I don't know about you.
Oh my gosh, no. People are like, why do you do what you do, Cami? And I'm like, because it was hard for me. I don't do this because it was easy and I was, and sexuality came supernaturally. It's like, I do this because it was hard and I had to learn. And if I can help people have, then I'm gonna.
So that actually, I think, leads really well into one of the pieces of information that I recommended she pass on is that sexuality doesn't necessarily come naturally and it doesn't come easily. Yes, I suppose for some people, maybe things just slide together in the right way. But there are, we know, because this is what we work with every day, there are a ton of people for whom, there's a lot of sort of work and information and knowledge that needs to be learned. And so just that normalizing the idea that if things are not working for you, if things are and everything worked out great, that's
so happy.
Wonderful. So happy for you. But if it's not, you're not abnormal and it's not weird and it's not shameful, right? It wasn't easy for me either. I think we have a similar experience with that. I am passionate about this because my experiences weren't great either. So
yeah. And when you say, it's not natural, I kind of liken it to breastfeeding when I was learning to and I say that when I was learning to breastfeed my kids, which any method of getting your baby happy and healthy is fine, but I had to learn how to do it. And I remember sitting there going, this is the most natural thing I've ever done, without realizing that I felt the same way about sex. It was the most natural thing. And there's a lot of learning that I had missed out on. And it left me, like you said, feeling broken and alone. And like it was my problem. It took a long time to approach it as a couple problem. And that is something that I face, and you probably face in your practice also, is maybe more of a patriarchal idea where husbands are sending wives to figure it out so that they can like sex. And so that might be one myth I throw out there, is when we're talking about sexuality, there's a lot of improvement we can do on our own. But I think systemically, because I'm a family counselor, I'm based in systems, that system as a couple needs to be changed and addressed also. The couple needs the education too, not just the person who's having the greatest distress, you know.
Right. And often, you know, like making a person the identified problem can actually be the problem sometimes. Like if you point to one person and say, you're the reason why this isn't working, that can sometimes be the thing that causes the problem, and or it can make whatever is happening much more difficult to work with. And so it's really important that we recognize that like we're all a part of this. And you know, just because somebody is experiencing more distress or is in pain, it doesn't mean that something is their fault or that they're the problem.
Yeah.
And that goes in both directions. With women, what I see frequently is women who are experiencing pain with sex, or women who, less in the beginning, in the early days, it isn't so much like I don't want to have sex. Usually that comes over time if they aren't dealing with the pain with sex or some of the other problems around sex. Over time, they stop wanting to have it. With men, it's often that they're shamed around their sexuality, like that they're animals, they're beasts, or they can't control, or they want it too much, or there's something wrong with them because, you know, they haven't approached their sexuality in the exact way that was prescribed by Mormonism. And so, you know, like there can be blaming that goes in both directions.
And I think realistic expectations are helpful. So if we were to, you know, point one, what's this advice we're giving this couple? One, it may not come naturally at first. It might take some practice and a whole lot of communication and approaching it as a team. And then as you're pointing out too, I believe we're all experiencing Mormonism differently. And so a couple could come into a marriage having different expectations of sexuality and different messaging around shame, around shoulds, just from a moralistic standpoint, even though the education isn't there, right? We've got those two sides of us where we need a complete education, but then we also need healthy attitudes.
Right. And I think that second point you made, you jumped right over it, but I think that's huge, is that communication, right? Like along with that idea that it should come naturally, there's often a lot of feeling like is this something we can talk about? Like what'll happen if we talk about this, right? If I'm not experiencing pleasure, or if I'm wanting this or that, is that something I can say out loud?
I know. And that brings up so many ideas around a woman's place and a man's place. The man be the leader, the man preside, the man be the head, the woman be kind, be accommodating. It can be really intimidating as a newlywed to open up these kinds of conversations. When I'm talking to couples who need to have hard conversations and they're scared to, the first kind of principle I'll try to set up in the room is, all right, let's set up as a goal that when we have these hard conversations, our goal is to take the other person seriously without taking the other person personally. So for, you know, a woman to then have the freedom to be able to say, sex hurts, and for the husband to take it seriously as something that needs to be addressed without taking it personally and internalizing all that shame. We don't get very far when we start to get wounded. But if we can stay rooted in taking each other seriously without taking each other personally. I think those hard conversations about sexual pleasure and working through the logistics of it, I think we can get a lot further.
So give me some examples of what you mean by taking it personally, because that, I mean, I agree with it and I see it all the time, but I think if you don't know what you're talking about, that might be
okay.
hard
Yeah.
to...
So an example, let's say a husband would say, okay, my favorite position is you on top. That's just my favorite. I love it. Let's have you on top. And she were to say, it hurts when I'm on top, and him to take it personally and get wounded and start to feel rejected, instead of moving in toward problem solving and saying, okay, let's get curious about what it means that you hurt. Are there some solutions there? Also, I don't want to have sex. That's probably the most frequent one, because we don't have any communication skills at all. And so women are saying, I just don't want to tonight. I'm tired. I don't feel like it. And the man then feeling rejected, instead of getting curious, taking it seriously, getting curious about why she's not interested, if there's something we can do to make it more appealing for her, and taking the problem seriously, but not taking it personally, because when we take it personally, then the locus of power shifts, and now we have to take care of the person whose pride or ego is wounded, and that doesn't solve the problem. Now the person with the problem is becoming the caretaker and needing to reassure the person whose feelings got hurt, and it's a way of not addressing the actual problem. We never really get back around to the problem.
So if your goal is to have really good sex with your partner, right? Like if that's your goal, and it is for most people, like that's what we want. We want to have fulfilling sex where both people feel good afterwards. You know, like it can cause a really, really difficult dynamic, you know, like when you take those things personally, either her pain or her lack of desire, or his desires or his lack of desire, right?
Or his erection that comes and goes. I have a lot of couples who aren't educated in a typical erection and start to take it really personally if the husband has an erection that comes and goes throughout a lovemaking session, which is actually totally normal because that blood needs to oxygenate. But they start to think, oh, I'm not desirable enough, I'm not doing enough, I'm not. And so this education, if we don't have this education piece, we start to make up stories where we're the problem or they're the problem, and we get very emotional and hurt about it. And a little education goes a long way in clearing up those stories we're telling ourselves.
I think one of the things that my clients find out over and over again is that they are normal, right? Like whatever it is you're worried about, whatever it is that's happening, there are probably a ton of other people with those same things. It's just that our education system, our narratives about sexuality, those are the things that are broken. You are normal. You are normal.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm thinking about the sweet client. I love newlywed Mormons who are struggling with sex. Yeah, and I had them on my couch, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, and they were in so much pain and they were hurting, and come to find out they had the expectation that she would find intercourse and penetration pleasurable, and that would bring her to orgasm. And they just thought they were doing it wrong, and they were in tears and they were so frustrated. And just the education piece that, oh honey, very few women are able to orgasm with penetration alone. She's like, what? She had no idea. We did some simple anatomy education about the clitoris and stimulation and the most typical ways that women come to orgasm. And it just broke that darkness for them. That she's like, so I'm normal? Yeah, you are. So we're not having sex wrong? No, you're not. And there was so much heartache around this myth of what should give her pleasure. She felt so broken. Right. You know? And she's like, I'm normal? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And this isn't just this isn't at all Mormonism's fault. Like this is Freud's fault. This is, like Western sexuality. Like this is Puritan
colonization. Yeah.
Right? Like this exists everywhere, right? Like women
Yeah.
everywhere think that they're supposed to get orgasm from penetration, and that penetration is the right kind of orgasm. And yet I think it's like 5% of women can orgasm from penetration alone.
Right. It's
Like
very,
it's
very
super
rare.
low. It's
And
super
they just
low.
had their education from the PG-13 movies they were allowed to watch, where it looked like, they kissed and then they penetrated and they both were happy afterward.
Right.
And man, that 45-second scene that we saw over and over and over in the PG-13 movies, same script, not helpful, not an accurate education.
Right.
And it also comes from, it's not Mormonism's fault. It's what we're presented in health class as far as the definition of sex is penis in vagina intercourse. We don't talk at all about female anatomy or female pleasure. So
Right. So there's a couple things that go along with penis and vagina sex that I think I would like to cover.
awesome.
One of them is that it shouldn't hurt, right? Like we have a myth in our world that the first time is going to hurt. And it does, but it does sometimes, but again,
it doesn't need
to. Right, it doesn't need to, and it's not supposed to, right? Like if you, like kiss for a very long time and stimulate the woman in the ways that you were talking about, and we can outline some of that if, like later, but, like stimulate her genital area and her clitoris. Generally speaking, what happens is the vagina actually changes shape as she becomes aroused. It sort of unfurls and lengthens.
Yeah, it lengthens, and we have erectile tissue just like the penis in all of our anatomy, and the blood pumps up and cushions that tissue, makes it longer, makes it longer, more palpable.
Right.
And I think as I've been talking to women, what we're describing is female arousal. And men arousal, it's pretty easy to recognize because it's like, oh, you're erect, you're not erect. But it takes a lot of tuning into your body.
Although that's a bit of a myth too.
I know. But it's harder to see.
Right.
And I think it takes more like mind-body awareness to say, oh, am I aroused or am I not? Another thing I talk about on my couch with women is they say, no, I'm ready for penetration. And I say, how do you know you're ready? And it's usually because I'm ready for it to be over with. I'm ready for him to orgasm so we can be done. It's like, well, that's not your body being ready. That's your mind saying I'm done. And it can be a challenge if you've not had a mind-body connection to be able to pay attention. Okay, am I feeling warmth in my genital area? And you can feel if you're tuned in for the physical readiness for penetration, which is totally different than I'm mentally ready to be done.
Right. Very good point. Very, very good point.
And so there shouldn't be blood. There shouldn't be pain. We never want to pair pain with sex. And so some women are like, we just got to push through it. It'll get better with time. And what we're actually doing is starting to pair the idea of pain with sex, which over time, like what you mentioned at the beginning when we started talking, when you start to do that and start to push through what you think you're going to push through the pain, you start to pair pain with sexuality in your mind, and your desire is going to really plummet as a natural response,
Right. Another myth I think that goes along with this is that you don't have to have penis in vagina sex the first day, right? Like for a Mormon couple that maybe hasn't even kissed a whole lot, trying to go from not having kissed very much or not having, and this isn't true of every couple, like some couples make out a lot before and they're very ready, right? Like their bodies have warmed up. But if you haven't kissed your partner a whole lot, and if, like you're not super, then you don't have to get that penis in the vagina on the first night of the honeymoon.
There's a lot that can be done. There's a lot of sexuality that can happen there. And I think that's because we define sex as penis and vagina intercourse, that we don't feel like we had sex unless there was intercourse. But that's not my definition of sex anymore. It's really pleasure. Sexual pleasure is the goal. And I didn't understand that as, you know, as options of what can we do? We can put all these things on the table in between kissing and intercourse, and that we can choose from a variety of experiences. And I feel bad because I remember hearing about some couples who didn't have intercourse on the first night, and I was super judgmental, like, oh, well, that's not okay. And now I'm like, oh, it's so okay. Please do that, you know? So that definition can really be challenged, I think.
Right. And so one other small thing about all of this, that just coming from my own honeymoon experience, pee after sex.
Sure. Yes. Yes.
Nobody told me that.
Nobody told you to pee?
Told me that. No. And I got a raging urinary tract infection on my honeymoon, and it was horrible because, you know, this person is their pH and their different bacteria have not mixed with yours before. And so it, you know, like it becomes less essential over time, you know, like I'm not probably going to get a urinary tract infection now from having sex with my husband. I've been married for 25 years, but you know, when we were first married, we'd never rubbed those parts up against each other before. And suddenly now all of his, you know, healthy, normal bacteria and my healthy, normal bacteria are mingling, but they don't know each other, right? And so peeing after sex just clears out the urethra, and it sort of cleans that out so that you don't get an infection on your honeymoon, which is the least fun thing ever.
And I remember I was so uneducated. I thought I had a urinary tract infection right after our honeymoon, and I went in, and the nurse practitioner I was talking to said that, they said, this is going to be like so much information about Cami. Said, yeah, you need to pee after. And I remember thinking, but the urethra is way up there and my vagina is way down there, and I didn't even know where my clitoris was, and not educated at all. But so that's an excellent piece. Make sure that you urinate after, because it's kind of an anesthetic, or not an anesthetic, antibacterial. I mean, it's cleans, right?
Right. So just as a side note, can I tell you the one piece of sex advice my mom gave me ever in my whole life?
Yeah.
Because it's ridiculous. So.
Sorry, Mom.
I don't think my mom didn't give me like the talk on purpose. I think she probably, because my brothers and sisters talk about getting the talk, and it really was the one talk, not the 5 minutes, 500 times, right? But I didn't ever get the talk. And I think it was because I was the youngest of 8 children. And so I think she just probably thought she had done it.
It filtered down. Yeah.
Right? Like, but I never heard a thing about sex from my mother. On my honeymoon, or like on the day before my wedding, my mother said, here's the piece of advice my dad gave me, and I'll give it to you. It
came from her dad. So this is Grandpa. Yep, This is Grandpa's wisdom. Okay.
Right. Once a king all your life, but once a night is enough. That was it. That's what she told me.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you feel like you were being told you needed to have sex every night, or were you just being told what was too much? More than once a night would be too much? Or...
I had no idea.
What did you even do with that?
You know, honestly, I kind of rolled my eyes. Thank goodness. Goodness. But mostly I was just like, I there were so many parts of me. There was a part of me that was kind of resentful, like, that's it. Like, I'm supposed to go have sex tomorrow, and that's it. That's it. And then there was another part of me that rolled my eyes that was like, that's silly. And then there was another part of me that wanted to run from the room screaming because my mother was talking about sex. And
Sure.
You know, because we hadn't had 5-minute conversations 500 times. So the idea that my mother, you know, like, I wish she hadn't even given me that much part of me.
Yeah.
So I had all
this advice we're giving the advice we're giving each other isn't always helpful. I remember, I think my in-laws thought I was going to run and not get married, because the night before we had like a wedding dinner, and I was an hour late because I was crying because I was scared to get married and have sex. And so I definitely wasn't ready. Like, let's talk about that for sure. But I was not ready, not educated, and I think I was the youngest of 4, and my sisters were calming me down. And my sisters are my best of friends. They are my best of friends, even still. And it wasn't great advice. It was like, oh, he's such a good little Mormon boy. You just, stroke his erect penis. He'll ejaculate. You won't even have to have intercourse. that was my advice. It wasn't helpful. It's so interesting, and I realized pretty quickly I didn't have an education. I thought we had an education because I was a marriage and family therapist. I was a marriage and family, I don't know, something major at BYU. Marriage, what is that? They change the name of it all the time. And we read all the books, but we read all the Mormon books. And all the Mormon books have very unhelpful suggestions like the man is a microwave and the woman is a crock pot. And it wasn't helpful. There were no pictures. There was no medical information. There was no explanation of what's normal and what's not normal. I have a lot of couples that come in thinking their husband has premature ejaculation because they'll read 2 pieces of information and think that they go together. They will read that it takes about 20 minutes of stimulation for women to have an orgasm, clitoral stimulation. And they will assume then that the man should be, and they'll believe that their orgasm should come through penetration. And so they'll believe that the man should be able to penetrate and thrust for 20 minutes in order for the wife to have an orgasm. And so they believe that their husband has premature ejaculation. And I'll give them just the really basic education point that, I can't diagnose someone with premature ejaculation if they're coming within 2 to 5 minutes, because that's normal. And they're just shocked. And the husband has this shame that he has premature ejaculation. He's not a man. He can't last long enough, that he's immature and too excited. And this just basic medical education can go such a long way in helping people know that they're normal, because we didn't have an education and we're making our own conclusions about what's healthy and normal that are fairly misguided.
Right. So one thing that I see that I think results in a lot of really bad experiences for my clients is a lot of the women in the situation really do not feel comfortable or able to ask for what they want, or to even know what they want. Like we've all been taught that being selfish is a bad thing. And like they really feel like, oh, I'm here, like if he's happy, then I'm happy. And, like, sure, I think we all are happy when we make each other happy,
Yeah.
But in the realm of sexuality, there has to be a certain level of, and I'm going to label it selfishness, even though I think that's a problematic label. There has to be a certain amount of selfishness, with the big quote marks around it, in order for it to be effective long term, right? Because if you go into your sexuality thinking, like, I'll just make him happy, I'll do what he wants, I'll make sure that he has an orgasm, and then our marriage will be good, right? Like, don't worry about me, don't touch me, I feel uncomfortable with that. And also just the idea that anything that's uncomfortable, like that we should avoid anything that's uncomfortable. And both of those things come together to make a lot of women start to not experience very much pleasure in their sex. And then over time, because sexuality requires desire, right? Like we have to want something in order to have desire. And if you don't know what you want, or if you can't ask for what you want, or if you don't know how to accept that pleasure, then over time, you're really not going to enjoy sex, right? Like it requires a certain amount of selfishness. For sexuality to work, it requires that we selfishly figure out what we want and need and like make that happen. Because if
Yeah.
you don't, it's just not going to work long term. Long term, over
No.
time, we'll start to resent and dislike. And that's not what we want to feel toward our partner.
No, I think I'm hearing like, I hear you making 5 points that we could probably spend an hour on each. And and the first, but they all go together. They're all tied together. The first point I hear you making, which is backed up by Peggy Ornstein in her book, Girls and Sex, is that girls define, in her research, girls would say they were having a satisfying sexual experience if 2 things were present. 1, it didn't hurt, and 2, their partner had a good time. That's an incredibly low bar to measure our sexual satisfaction. It didn't hurt, the partner had a good time. Okay. So you mentioned that at the beginning. Yeah, that idea definitely has got to go. There's got to actually be some pleasure and satisfaction in it for the female that's not just altruistic pleasure, right? And the obstacle, one of the obstacles there is not knowing what they want. And my advice to a newlywed is, if you aren't sure how your body works or you've never had an orgasm, it's really unlikely that your partner on the first night is going to know how to give you an orgasm. And I think that is pervasive in our American culture, but I think it gets a little more ingrained in our Mormon culture, because I absorbed the idea that I don't need to know much about sex. My husband will know everything about sex and teach me. And I did not, I don't know why, because I think I got that message that men are more sexual. Like, I even remember a Laurel advisor saying, you know, women want to have children. And so God gave them a desire to have sex so that they'd want to have children, because they really don't want children like women do, but they want sex, and that's how you get children. It's like, wait, that's just terrible. And so that idea, you know, that if you don't know your body and you don't know what it takes to come to an orgasm, it's very, very unlikely that your husband will know. And so we've got to challenge that idea with the idea that you are going to have to take an equal role in teaching him, that he would teach you what's pleasurable for him and you would teach him what's pleasurable for you. And if you don't know what's pleasurable for you, then there's a lot of exploring that's going to have to happen.
And that can be a big hurdle to overcome, because, you know, like the idea that you're going to put your hand down on your genitals and touch yourself, that can be really scary for a lot of women, right? Like,
really scary. And I have women who won't. I have women who we've got to figure it out with a partner, and it's doable. It's harder. If I have women who will realize who realize that there's wisdom and goodness in knowing your own body completely and then sharing it with your husband, that the goal is goodness, and there's goodness in being the expert of your own body, and that you can feel God's approval of that, we can make faster progress. But I do have some clients who aren't able to make that concession, who really only feel comfortable living these letters of the law that men have given us in the 70s, and that they haven't really been recanted about self-touch. And so that would be one piece of my advice, is bring the expectations way down. If you've never had an orgasm, you probably won't that first time, and he's not going to know any more than you are.
And similarly, if you have had an orgasm,
mm-hmm.
if, you know, at some point in your life you have figured out how that works for you,
mm-hmm.
chances are he won't be able to figure that out without you cluing him in on how that works for
mm-hmm.
you.
Yeah, with communication and teaching.
Right.
So if we've got this expectation that we're going to slide together naturally and it's going to be so great, you might feel really disappointed of like, well, why do I have to tell you this? You know?
Right.
But I think your last point was what leads to sexual resentment is continual, frequent and repeated experiences where sex was obligation to meet the partner's needs. When there isn't something in it for you, then it will become a chore and resentment will build. And Yeah, we use the word selfishness, meaning you have to want something. You could also use the word mindfulness instead of selfishness, being mindful of your
Or
desires.
self-awareness.
Self-aware. We could find a lot of words, but what you're saying is true, that, and this comes from Esther Perel, is, love and desire are completely different things. That desire means wanting something. I have a desire for chocolate pudding. I have a desire for a new pair of shoes. I have a desire for sexual pleasure. It means I want something. But characteristically, love is characterized by security and having, like, oh, I feel so secure that I have you in my life, and we're content. We're not wanting something. And so we have to kind of, I think, pull these ideas apart of love and desire. We've been told, which is I can see why we've said it, is when you love someone enough, you have sex together. I think that's a good principle. It keeps us safe. It keeps a lot of people out of scary situations. But I have a lot of excellent couples on my couch where the love is really genuine and the commitment is really deep and the sexual desire is a mess, and they keep thinking, if I can love you more, but really we need to talk about desire. And if I can want something from you,
Right.
if I can want pleasure and want you to be the one that gives it to me.
Right.
And love is characterized by what I'm giving. Desire is characterized by what it's possible to get, and that anticipation of getting something that's exciting.
Right. And that kind of leads me to another thought I have about desire and, Mormon marriages, because one of the things that I have seen on my couch more than once is couples coming in and saying, we love each other, our marriages work well, but we got married for reasons other than being sexually attracted to each other. And maybe we aren't sexually attracted to each other. And sometimes this is like a mixed orientation marriage, like that happens for sure.
Yeah.
But sometimes it really just is like a lack of attraction. Like I don't ever remember really wanting my partner. And sometimes it goes in both directions, and sometimes it's just one person, right? Like I have no memory of like kissing them and feeling tingly. I have no, I don't remember ever really wanting or desiring to have sex with my partner. And, sexual research is always a little bit hard to come by because the funding isn't there. And
and when the funding is there, it's male-centered.
Right. And so one of the things that, I hear a lot of couples therapists say, and it seems to be true in my experience with couples, is that if you never felt desire for your partner, if you never sort of felt turned on or tingly or felt your fun parts throbbing, or, right, like if that never happened for you, it may not be possible, it's sort of like the idea of like, you can, if you used to have sparks, you might be able to fan the flames and get those back. But if there were never sparks, right, if you were never attracted to each other, the chances that you'll be able to learn to be attracted to each other are pretty small. And so this is where...
Yeah, because, it makes most sense in the form of a mixed orientation marriage where there's not enough, conversion therapy doesn't work. And so if the attraction's not, it's really a principle of attraction. And just because you're both straight doesn't mean that you're going to be attracted to one another. And our Mormon culture gives us a script of who we are looking for to marry. Very clearly, you are looking for a return missionary. Well, I'll give you my script. My script was a return missionary, someone who had a strong family in the church, someone who had leadership capabilities, someone who wanted to provide, and someone who wanted me. That was that was my script. That's what I was looking for. And we don't add into that someone you're attracted to. And so a lot of times in these, there's some are better than others. Some Facebook groups talking about desire. There's a lot of them, a lot of closed Facebook groups talking about desire. One of the things I get frustrated with is I see a lot of people using this word desire instead of attraction. and say, they have really low desire. And so how do we fan desire? And I'm like, it might not be desire, it might be attraction. Or it might not be desire, it might be aversion that they're experiencing, or it might not be low desire, it might be asexuality, or it might not be low desire, it might be they don't like the kind of sex you're offering. And we term all of that a low desire spouse. And I think we need to get much more detailed in what we're talking about. Otherwise, we assume that the low desire spouse could be fixed if they just get to know themselves better. Right. But there could be a lot of other things going on, like attraction. I think that was a rabbit hole, but I'm saying I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that it's just something, like to think about or rethink. If you're getting married to someone and you don't know whether you feel attraction toward them, like I don't want to tell you to move against your values at all, but I think every couple should at least have a couple hot and heavy makeout sessions.
Right.
To know, like, is this something I'm actually really interested in doing with my partner? Is this something that, like, my body, not my brain, but my body is interested in doing with this person? And it doesn't necessarily have to be there, because if you get two partners who are a little bit maybe toward the asexual spectrum, and neither one of them is that interested in sex, that coupling can totally work. It doesn't have to be an essential part of every marriage, but it is something that I definitely think you would be better off to be aware of prior to getting married than trying to fix after you have 5 kids.
Yeah, and if we take some of the advice from general authorities in the 70s, where who was it said, kissing over the altar for the first time is a worthy goal, basically, you're not going to know. You might, with your eyes, see someone as attractive, meaning you like their features and that mentally that they are attractive, but that is not going to last until 80. And so you're saying that body connection, that physical chemistry actually is a real thing, and that can last till 80 if it's nurtured, even though our bodies change. And I'm thinking of a client I had, who just had decided she was asexual. They ended up divorcing, and she came back to my office, was like, I am not asexual. I am dating, and I feel like I am going through puberty again. And it was that attraction piece had just been missed in her first marriage, because she married really smart. She checked all the boxes, but was really unhappy.
Right. I would say that theme of women thinking they're asexual is very common in my practice. Very, very common, right? And there are actually asexual people, so I don't necessarily want to challenge their perception, but right.
When we're looking for a reason of why we don't want to have sex with our partner, that idea of maybe I'm asexual, I think some people are asexual, and it would have been a pattern throughout their life, right? So we look back, well, have you ever felt desire with another person strongly, But I do also think it's a way that women fall on the sword for their husband, because it's really difficult to start to look at whether or not we're attracted to each other. And if we're not willing to take that seriously, but we start to take that personally, I only enter that conversation if I think both people are able to do it well and have demonstrated the skills of communicating and taking each other personally without taking each other seriously.
Right. It can take a ton of emotional maturity to hear that someone isn't physically attracted to you and not take that personally, right?
Or even to start to explore if that could be a possibility or not.
Right. Because being sexually attractive, even if it isn't explicitly said in Mormonism, it's certainly an American ideal, right? Like we should all be sexually attracted, and the more people who are attracted to us, the more valuable we are as human beings, which of course,
it's a form of power.
Right. Intellectually, we can challenge that and be like, yeah, no, that's not really my value. But we all still feel rejected if someone isn't attracted to us, especially if that person is our person, the person we want to spend the rest of our life with. The idea, and so I don't want to.
So if you're getting married and I think this is excellent advice, that if you're on the cusp of engagement or getting married and this person has checked all the boxes, I'm so happy, but also check in with your body. Do you have a physical response that wants that person to touch you, that wants that person to touch you in certain ways? Or is it just a smart move?
Right.
I also think one of the things that we can overlook with newlyweds is, I don't know that it's necessarily fair that historically we've asked women to be ready for 3 things simultaneously. We've asked them to be ready to go through the temple, we've asked them to be ready for marriage, and we've asked them to be ready for sex all at the same time. And I don't know if that's fair. Historically, men have done the temple thing before, but I do think people can be ready for marriage, like ready for commitment, ready to start a family, but still not be ready for sex because of their education or their maturity. And I don't know that we can uncouple those, but I wish we could. I think we're starting to allow, the temple to be a personal experience instead of a marriage experience. That's wonderful. But I also don't think getting married is a good response to horny. Like, I don't think horny is enough to get married. So if we flip it from make sure you're attracted to the person to, oh, I'm so attracted to this person that I'm going to get married.
That might have been why I got married.
Listen, because I'm okay getting pushback on this idea, but I feel like marriage is a bigger deal than sex. It's a bigger commitment. It has farther reaching implications on our families and the children that will come. I don't think that entering into marriage because we're horny and wanting to have sex is a good enough reason. And I will get some pushback there, but I just don't think it's wise.
Yeah, well, I mean, I
would rather see a quote unquote mistake and a later marriage than a rushed marriage that ends up being a mistake.
Right, especially when kids get involved.
Yeah.
So let's put a bookmark in this discussion, because I think it would be great to talk about some of the disadvantages to getting married because you're horny, and where that can go wrong. And we'll pick that up on our next discussion. Cami, thank you so much for joining us here at Mormon Sex Info.
Yes, this was so fun. I feel like we're just like having lunch and having a conversation. It's the best.
Yeah, let's pick this up next week and have more discussions about things that we wish we knew when we got married as Mormon virgin
so many.
girls.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Lisa.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
It's been a long road here, a trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary, it's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary.